The great hall of the Zareth Prime Embassy was filled with tension so thick it could almost be touched. Light shimmered off the polished metal walls, reflecting the anxious faces of delegates from two warring empires, the Zarithian Empire and the Vortan Coalition. For centuries, these two civilizations had fought over colonies, resources, and pride. Each war had left scars on planets, burned cities, and countless lives lost. And now, after decades of hatred and bloodshed, they had agreed, reluctantly, to meet and talk. They called it peace talks, but the word felt hollow in a room full of suspicion and unhealed anger. Captain Elias Carter stood in the observation room high above the hall, behind a large, transparent viewport. The Terran delegation was small, a single human crew observing from orbit. Humans had stayed away from conflicts like this for decades. Many in the galaxy thought Terrans were passive, quiet, unwilling to risk themselves in wars that did not concern them. But Elias knew better. Humanity had learned the hard way that cowardice led to loss. When others faltered, humans acted, not because they sought glory, but because they could not stand seeing life destroyed needlessly. Elias's eyes scanned the room. The Zarithian diplomats were tall, with pale blue skin and eyes that flickered with intensity. Every gesture, every glance was calculated to show strength. They spoke in measured tones, their claws tapping lightly on the table, a subtle signal of readiness for violence. The Vortan delegates, on the other hand, were broader, scaled, and imposing. Their amber eyes glowed faintly in the hall's light, and their spiked shoulders made even humans appear fragile. They were warriors, and warriors carried centuries of pride that could not be erased by polite words alone. The first words of the session were cautious. A Zarithian diplomat leaned forward, her hands folded neatly, and said, "We gather today in the hope that reason can overcome the mistakes of the past. Your coalition has attacked our colonies, and the losses are significant. Can we find a solution that ends this bloodshed?" The Vortan general bared his teeth in response, a low growl vibrating in his chest. "We strike where necessary. The colonies were defended poorly. You expect us to apologize for enforcing what we believe is right?" A shiver ran through the human observers. Words could escalate faster than weapons in a room like this. Generations of war had made both sides fragile and defensive. Elias's stomach tightened. He knew the talks would likely fail unless someone, or something, shifted the balance in a way neither side could ignore. The Zarithian diplomat's voice grew firmer. "We are not here to provoke. We are here to prevent further deaths. Consider the civilians, children, families, innocents. Can you look at them and say your actions are just?" The Vortan general laughed, but it was a harsh, angry sound. "We do what we must. Your compassion is weakness. Peace is only for the strong or the foolish who do not understand the universe." Elias clenched his fists. He could feel the tension vibrating through the walls, into the floors, into his own chest. This was the moment when history could turn ugly. One wrong word, one wrong gesture, and the centuries of hatred would erupt into violence. The thought of billions dying because of pride and stubbornness made him feel hollow. Humans had lost enough worlds in their own history to know that war was not glorious. It was necessary only when there was no other choice. As the conversation continued, Elias's mind wandered to his crew. They were trained for war, yes, but also for diplomacy in its most subtle form. A human crew did not need to fight to be effective. Sometimes presence alone could shift the hearts of civilizations. But would mere presence be enough here? The Vortans slammed a clawed hand on the table. "Enough words. We are done with talks. Action speaks louder than speeches." The Zarithian's eyes narrowed. "Then you leave us no choice." The room seemed to shrink with tension. Everyone's pulse quickened. The humans in orbit, silent and unseen, held their breath. Elias knew the first shot could trigger centuries of hatred in a single heartbeat. Yet he also knew that humans had a chance to prevent that. Humanity's reputation, their courage, and their willingness to act when necessary had always been underestimated, and that underestimation was now their secret weapon. Elias took a deep breath. His eyes narrowed. Somewhere in the distance, through sensors and comms, his ship waited, silent, powerful, and ready. The galaxy did not yet realize that humans had arrived, not to conquer, not to command, but to remind warring species that life, all life, was worth protecting. And as the words escalated into shouts, Elias knew peace, fragile as it was, might come. But it would come only when the Terrans made their presence known. The hall erupted with voices that clashed like thunder. The Xerithian diplomat's calm veneer had cracked. Her claws tapped furiously on the table as she spoke, each word slicing through the tension. Your attacks on our border colonies are unforgivable. You claim strategy, but you bring death. The Vortan general's amber eyes blazed. His voice rumbled, deep and commanding. We act as necessary. We do not bow to your morality. Your colonies are a risk to the coalition. You cannot expect us to hesitate. Shouts rose. The echoes of centuries of hatred filled the room. Threats were exchanged with pride and fury, and memories of lost worlds hung in the air. Every delegate carried the weight of history. Generations of loss, betrayal, and mistrust crowded the space between words. Captain Elias Carter watched silently from the observation deck above, hands gripping the railing. He had been trained to read such moments, to sense when words could become weapons. The humans were observers officially, but Elias knew the true power of presence. Humans were underestimated, always underestimated. And that was their advantage. His stomach tightened as he realized the talks were on the edge of collapse. If the Vortans struck, retaliation would be immediate. The Xerithians would respond with deadly precision. In minutes, perhaps seconds, the hall could become a battlefield. Innocent lives would be lost. Families would burn. Worlds might suffer. Humans could not allow that. Not if there was a way to prevent it. He turned to his communications officer, Lieutenant Mara Lin. Keep the crew ready, he said quietly. Sensors active, weapons silent, but be ready to act if the talks fail. Mara nodded, her jaw tight. Yes, Captain. But we hope it doesn't come to that. Elias's gaze returned to the hall. The Xerithian diplomat leaned forward, her blue eyes sharp and unwavering. Consider what we risk. Children, families, innocence, countless lives already lost. Can you continue this war without shame? The Vortan general slammed a claw on the table. The sound rattled the room. Shame? Weakness? We answer only to strength. We do what must be done. Peace is for those too afraid to fight. Elias's heart clenched. The words were sharp and proud, yet beneath the surface he sensed fear. Fear of losing control, fear of being judged, fear of something greater than their own power. And that fear, that subtle vulnerability, was what humans could touch, if they dared. Then the comm in his observation deck crackled. A calm, mechanical voice cut through the tension. Captain Carter, unidentified vessel detected exiting warp near orbit of Xereth Prime. Mass and energy signature consistent with Terran Warship. Elias froze for a heartbeat, then exhaled slowly. Show me. The hollow screen flickered to life. There it was. A Terran warship, massive and gleaming. Its hull was sleek, silver, and polished like starlight had been melted and molded into a shape of power and purpose. Its engines hummed quietly, weapons silent, but unmistakably present. The ship did not fire. It did not threaten. And yet the presence of a human vessel so deliberate and undeniable made the hairs on Elias's arms stand. In the embassy hall, delegates paused mid-gesture. The Vortan's amber eyes widened. The Zerithian's claws twitched. A silence fell so heavy that every heartbeat seemed audible. Legends of Terran intervention were told in whispers across galaxies, but few had ever believed humans would appear in person. And now, they had. Elias spoke softly into the comm. We are here to observe, yes. But we will protect life if you fail to do so yourselves. His voice carried calm authority, the quiet strength humans had always relied upon. The Vortan general's tail flicked nervously. The Zerithian diplomat's jaw tightened. Every delegate felt a strange weight pressing down, a weight not of fear, but of realization. Humans had arrived. Humans were present. Humans were watching. Elias's hands relaxed slightly. He could feel the shift in energy, the subtle trembling of power and pride. The room was still a battlefield of words, but one factor had changed everything. Humans had entered the stage, and the galaxy had always underestimated them. Marilyn leaned toward him. They'll listen now, she whispered. You've reminded them what humans are capable of. Elias nodded. Not yet, but they will. They have no choice now. The Terran Warship hung in orbit, silent, powerful, and calm. Its presence was a mirror to humanity itself, unassuming, yet ready to act. And somewhere deep in the hearts of the delegates, a seed of respect and fear had been planted. For the first time in decades, there was a moment when war did not feel inevitable. And that moment, fragile, tense, yet filled with promise, was the gift humanity had brought to the galaxy. The words of the delegates, the anger, the pride, all of it paused. And for one long, shining moment, peace felt possible. The hall, once filled with shouts and fury, fell into a silence so deep it felt unnatural. The Vortan's amber eyes darted nervously toward the windows, scanning the stars beyond, while the Zerithian's claws clenched on the polished table. Neither side had expected this, the Terran warship hovering silently above the planet. Its hull gleamed under the starlight, reflecting a calm strength that demanded attention. Every delegate could feel it, even if they did not understand why. Captain Elias Carter stood behind the glass, hands resting lightly on the railing. His crew moved like shadows around him, quiet and precise. Weapons remained silent, shields unraised. Yet the presence of humans alone had already shifted the mood in the room below. Elias's heart thumped in his chest, a mixture of pride and anxiety. This was exactly the moment they had trained for, the moment when humans could turn the tide of potential bloodshed without firing a single shot. In the hall, the Vortan general leaned forward, his voice low and hesitant. Are they really here? A single ship? The legends. They are true. The Zerithian diplomat's blue eyes flickered with emotion. Fear, awe, and disbelief all rolled into one. It cannot be, she whispered. The Terrans, they do not intervene. No one thought they would come. Elias allowed himself a small nod. They were learning. The Vortans and Zerithians had spent centuries believing humans were distant, unconcerned, small. They had underestimated humanity at every turn, and that underestimation had allowed humans to survive, thrive, and now, to save lives in ways that others could not imagine. He leaned slightly closer to the viewport, his voice calm but firm over the comm. We are not here to take sides, but we will not watch life be destroyed needlessly. Understand this, we value life, all life. Not because it is convenient, but because it is right. The Vortan general's claws twitched on the table. For a moment, his pride wavered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. The Zerithians stiffened, their whispers of strategy and threats fading into silence. Something larger than their wars had entered their orbit, and both sides instinctively recognized it. A junior Zerithian delegate dared to speak. They will act if we fight? Her voice trembled. Elias did not reply with threats. Humans rarely did. Instead, he allowed the truth to speak through presence alone. His stance, calm and unwavering, reflected the history of a species that had survived wars, famine, and countless hardships. Humans had not always been strong, but they had always been courageous. That courage, now visible to the galaxy, was its own weapon. The Vortan general swallowed hard. His tail flicked anxiously across the floor. Legends do not prepare you for the reality, he muttered almost to himself. A single ship. But it feels like an army. The Zerithians nodded slowly, eyes wide. We have misjudged humans, one said quietly. For too long we thought they were weak. But weakness is not what stands there above our planet. Strength and honor, that is what we see. Elias could feel the weight of the moment. The galaxy had always underestimated humans. But here, in this fragile room, their presence alone was changing the hearts and minds of those who had caused centuries of war. Hours passed. The delegates sat silent, some in awe, some in fear, and some slowly reconsidering. The humans did not move aggressively. They did not fire weapons or issue threats. They simply existed, a mirror reflecting the choices of the delegates. Continue hatred or choose life. A Vortan soldier whispered to his companion, "If they attack, we are finished. But they have not attacked, and yet we cannot ignore them." The Zerithian diplomat's voice, once sharp and commanding, softened. "Perhaps there is another way. Perhaps life is more important than pride." Elias exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief and resolve washing over him. The Terran Warship had done what centuries of diplomacy could not. It forced warring sides to pause, to reflect, to reconsider. And the beauty of it was that no one had fired a shot. Not one life had been lost. He turned to his XO Mara Lynn. "Watch them," he said softly. "They are learning what humans have always known. Courage is not loud. Strength is not just weapons, and life is always worth protecting." Mara's eyes reflected the glow of the stars and the ship's hull. "It's working, Captain. They respect us, maybe even fear us, and respect is stronger than any weapon in their hands." Elias nodded, knowing the truth. The galaxy had underestimated humans for too long, but today, humanity had shown that courage, presence, and the will to protect life could change the course of history. In the hearts of the Zerithians and Vortans, a seed had been planted, one that could grow into peace, if nurtured carefully. And as the Terran Warship hung silently above Zareth Prime, shining in the starlight, the delegates understood something they had never truly realized before. Humans were not just survivors. Humans were guardians, and the galaxy, whether ready or not, would never forget it. The once hostile hull seemed to breathe differently now. The anger and pride that had clashed like steel against steel were replaced with hesitation, a fragile pause that felt almost sacred. The Terran Warship hung in orbit above Zareth Prime, its hull gleaming like a silver promise, silent but commanding. Every delegate below knew humanity had arrived and the rules of engagement had quietly changed. Captain Elias Carter leaned against the observation deck railing, watching the hull. He could feel the tension easing just slightly, as the warring leaders processed the reality of human presence. Humans were not there to attack. Humans were not there to conquer. They were there to observe, yes, but also to remind all species that life, regardless of origin, had value. The Zerithian diplomat spoke first, her voice soft but steady. Perhaps we have been too stubborn, too proud, too quick to cling to old grudges. Her eyes met those of the Vortan general, searching for a sign of change. There must be a way to protect our people without sacrificing more lives. The Vortan general's amber eyes narrowed, and for a long moment, the room held its breath. He had been trained to see weakness, to attack it, to exploit it. And yet here was a presence that was neither weak nor aggressive. but infinitely more powerful than he had expected. His pride warred with reason, and the first cracks of doubt appeared. "They will intervene if we continue," the general muttered almost to himself. "The humans, they have always been underestimated, but their reputation is not a lie." Elias allowed himself a quiet sigh. This was the first real shift. Words alone could not have achieved this. Weapons alone could not have achieved this. It was presence, restraint, and the quiet courage of humanity that had altered the course of the negotiations. The room's atmosphere continued to evolve. Delegates leaned forward, listening, calculating, reconsidering. For the first time, they began speaking not from pride, not from fear, but from reason. They began to see that peace was possible, but only if they allowed themselves to try. A young Zerithian delegate, barely more than a cadet, dared to speak. "If humans are willing to watch, to intervene only when necessary, perhaps we too can find a path that does not lead to blood." Her voice was tentative, but it carried the weight of hope. The Vortan general's tail flicked nervously, but he nodded slowly. Perhaps we have been too focused on strength. Maybe courage is not only in battle. Maybe courage is in choosing life over war." Elias felt a swell of pride in his chest. Humans had always acted not out of desire for conquest, but out of principle, out of respect for life. That principle, now visible to the galaxy, was beginning to work where centuries of diplomacy had failed. He glanced at his XO, Mara Lynn. "They're listening," he said quietly. "Not because they fear us, not because we threaten them, but because they see what we value. Life, honor, responsibility. That is humanity's true power." Mara nodded, eyes reflecting both the starlight and the glow of the Terran Warship. "It's subtle," she said, "but it's working. Look at them, they're changing. Slowly, but they are." Minutes turned into hours. The delegates discussed border disputes, resources, and colonies with a new mindset. The anger that had once consumed them had been replaced with consideration. Humans had not fired a single shot, yet they had forced warring civilizations to pause, to reflect, to consider the value of life above pride and revenge. Elias felt the weight of the moment. This was why humans had survived in a galaxy that often underestimated them, not through brute force alone, not through numbers or weapons, but through a combination of courage, intellect, and a moral compass that refused to bend for cruelty. As the sun rose over Zareth Prime, casting golden light over the hall, Elias spoke softly into his calm. "Remember this, crew. Sometimes the strongest intervention is the one you do not make. Presence, courage, and restraint, those are what make humans formidable. And today we are proving it." The delegates signed preliminary agreements, hesitant but willing. Small gestures of respect replaced the earlier hostility. A Vortan diplomat extended a clawed hand to a Zerithian counterpart, and the Zerithian hesitated only a moment before shaking it. The room's atmosphere shifted from tension to cautious hope. Elias allowed himself a smile. It was fragile, yes, but real. The humans had reminded two proud civilizations that war was not the only answer. And the galaxy, for the first time in decades, had glimpsed what humanity could bring. Not destruction, but protection, courage, and the quiet strength to choose life over hate. As the Terran Warship hovered silently above, the galaxy seemed to pause. And somewhere in the hearts of the Zerithians and Vortans, a single thought began to take root. Maybe humans were not what they had feared. Maybe humans were exactly what the universe needed. The tentative calm in the hall was fragile, like a thin layer of ice over a raging river. The Zerithians and Vortans had begun to speak with reason, yet centuries of pride and mistrust could not vanish overnight. Every glance, every gesture, held the weight of history. Captain Elias Carter watched quietly from the observation deck, his eyes sharp. He knew the moment for action, if it became necessary, was approaching. Below, the The Vortan general's claws tapped impatiently on the table. His amber eyes flicked to the Zerithians, then to the Terran warship visible in the orbital viewport. "We do not bend to outsiders," he growled, voice low but trembling slightly. "We make our own choices." The Zerithian diplomat leaned forward, her blue eyes narrowing. "And yet you have paused. You feel the weight of our presence, the Terran's presence. That alone is changing your mind, is it not?" The general's jaw tightened. He had never been one to show fear, yet the silent human warship hovering above their planet carried an unspoken warning that words could not convey. It was not a threat, and yet it was the most formidable warning he had ever encountered. Humans did not need to act to command respect. They simply existed with conviction, purpose, and unwavering courage. Elias spoke over the comm, his voice calm but firm. "You do not need to fear us. We are not here to conquer. But understand this. We will not allow needless death. If you choose to attack, you will face consequences, not just from us but from your own conscience. Life is worth more than pride." The Vortan general's tail flicked nervously. The room grew quiet. Even junior delegates from both sides could sense the tension, the invisible line drawn in the air. Humanity's presence had shifted the balance. Neither pride nor hatred could override the awareness that humans could act decisively if required. A Zerithian elder, one of the longest-serving diplomats, cleared his throat. "Perhaps it is time we consider what we truly want. Power is meaningless if it destroys everything. Strength is hollow if it leaves only ashes." His words, deliberate and soft, hung in the air. The Vortan general's claws tapped faster, frustration and fear mingling. "And if we do not agree? If we insist on our position?" Elias stepped forward slightly, though still behind the protective glass. His voice was quiet, but it carried an authority that could not be ignored. "Then we will act. Not to conquer, not to destroy, but to protect those who cannot protect themselves. You may underestimate humans, but we have acted when others faltered, and we will act again. Do not doubt that." For a long moment, silence reigned. Then slowly, the Vortan general lowered his claws. The fight in his eyes remained, but it was tempered by caution and the realization that the humans above were not bluffing. The Terran warship did not need to fire. Its presence alone was enough to change the course of events. The room shifted further as the delegates began to reconsider. Words replaced threats. Proposals replaced demands. The centuries of hatred and suspicion that had defined generations now found themselves facing a force that was not aggressive yet impossible to ignore. A young Vortan diplomat, barely trained, whispered to her companion, They could destroy us if they wished, but they do not. They are teaching us something. Life, respect, honor." Elias's heart swelled with quiet pride. This was the moment humans had always been capable of creating, not through weapons but through presence, courage, and moral strength. Generations had underestimated humanity, yet here, on the edge of potential slaughter, humans were the deciding factor. The Zerithians extended tentative gestures of peace. The Vortans slowly began to mirror them. It was subtle. A hand offered, a bow of the head, but it was enough to show that the first real steps toward reconciliation were happening. Elias exhaled. "It is not over," he said softly to Mara Lynn, who stood beside him. "But we've reminded them what is possible. We've shown them that courage and restraint can rewrite history." Mara nodded, her eyes reflecting the glow of the stars outside. "They are listening, not just hearing us but understanding, and that is more powerful than any weapon we could have fired." The Terran warship remained in orbit, silent, patient, and unwavering. Its presence had prevented war, saved countless lives, and reminded the galaxy that humans were not only survivors, they were protectors. And the memory of this day would echo across stars, shaping diplomacy, inspiring courage, and proving that sometimes the strongest action is the one you do not take. Elias looked down at the hall below. The delegates were still tense, still wary, but there was a change, a spark of hope that had not existed before. Humanity had not conquered, and yet they had won something far greater, the chance for peace, born not from fear, but from respect. And somewhere deep in the hearts of the Zerithians and Vortans, a quiet realization took root. Life was stronger than pride, courage was stronger than weapons, and humans had reminded them of that truth. The great hall, once tense with hatred and fear, now felt different. The Zerithians and Vortans no longer glared at each other with open hostility. Instead, their movements were measured, cautious, as if each gesture could tip the fragile balance toward either war or peace. Captain Elias Carter observed silently from the observation deck above, his hands resting lightly on the railing. Humanity's presence had already shifted the tide, but now the real work began, guiding them toward true understanding. The Terran Warship remained in orbit, gleaming under Zareth Prime's twin suns. It did not move aggressively, and its weapons stayed silent. Yet its existence alone carried a weight that neither the Zerithians nor the Vortans could ignore. It was a reminder that life could be protected, that there was a force in the galaxy willing to defend the innocent, and that pride alone could not dictate the future. A Zerithian elder rose from his seat, voice calm but filled with authority. We have spent centuries fighting one another. Countless lives lost, planets scarred, families destroyed. Perhaps it is time to ask ourselves, what do we truly gain from continued hatred? The Vortan general leaned forward, claws tapping lightly on the table. His amber eyes, once burning with defiance, now flickered with uncertainty. Perhaps we have been blinded by tradition and pride. Perhaps we have been unwilling to see that strength can take many forms. The words hung in the room like fragile glass. One wrong move, one harsh tone, and it could shatter into chaos. But the human presence above was steady, unwavering, and somehow contagious. It reminded the delegates that courage was not measured in weapons or armies, but in the willingness to protect life and act justly. Elias's voice broke softly over the comm. Courage is not only in battle, true courage is choosing to protect others even when it is difficult. Humanity has survived because we value life, even when it is inconvenient. Perhaps you too can choose the same. A young Vortan diplomat, barely more than a cadet, dared to raise her voice. If the humans can watch without attacking, even when they could, perhaps we can do the same. Perhaps we can choose life over old hatred. The Zerithian diplomat's blue eyes softened, a rare smile flickering across her face. Perhaps there is hope. We can begin by protecting the innocent, by creating boundaries that honor both sides, and by learning to listen instead of striking first. Slowly, carefully, discussions began to transform. Words replaced threats. Proposals replaced accusations. For the first time, centuries of rivalry seemed secondary to a larger goal, preserving life and building understanding. The humans did not speak often, but their example guided every step. Their presence was not dominating, it was illuminating, shining light into the shadows of mistrust. Elias felt a swell of pride, quiet but intense. Humans had always been underestimated. Their small numbers, their distant planets, their fragile appearance, all led others to dismiss them. But it was humans' heart, their unyielding courage, and their willingness to stand for what was right that had made this day possible. The delegates began drafting preliminary agreements. Border disputes were carefully outlined, trade routes secured, and joint patrols suggested to protect civilians. Even minor gestures, a handshake, a nod, a bowed head, became symbols of trust. The atmosphere, while still cautious, was now filled with possibility instead of rage. Mara Lynn, Elias's XO, glanced at him quietly. "They're listening, Captain. Not just hearing us. They're understanding." Elias nodded, eyes fixed on the warship beyond the viewport. "Understanding is the first step. Respect is the next. And once respect takes root, peace will follow. Today we've given them the choice. Tomorrow, they will take it further." Hours passed, and the first real smiles appeared on faces that had once been hardened by war. Delegates spoke honestly about their fears and hopes. They discussed shared history, the mistakes of their ancestors, and the possibility of a future where life mattered more than pride. It was fragile, yes, and the road ahead would be long, but the first seeds had been planted. Elias exhaled quietly. "This is why we exist," he said softly, almost to himself. "Not to conquer, not to dominate, but to remind the galaxy that life is worth protecting. That courage comes in many forms. That humans, even when small in number, can inspire great change." The Terran Warship remained silent above, a sentinel of hope. Its presence alone had rewritten centuries of enmity into the possibility of understanding. And somewhere deep in the hearts of the Zerithians and Vortans, a realization had taken root. Life was stronger than pride, unity more powerful than hate, and courage more enduring than fear. As the delegates left the hall, the energy in the room was no longer tense or hostile. It was quiet, yet vibrant, filled with potential. Humanity had not fired a single shot. They had not demanded submission or respect. They had simply reminded the galaxy of what was always possible when a species chose life, courage, and honor. Elias allowed himself a rare, small smile. The seeds of peace had been sown, and in time the galaxy would grow stronger because of it. The hall was quiet now, filled with a new energy that had never existed before. The Zarithians and Vortans, once locked in centuries of hatred, moved with caution, but their gestures carried something entirely new: respect. Captain Elias Carter observed from the observation deck, hands resting lightly on the railing, heart calm yet full of pride. Humanity had arrived not to dominate, not to conquer, but to remind the galaxy of what it had long forgotten: the true strength of courage and life. The Terran Warship hovered silently above Zareth Prime, gleaming in the starlight like a silver sentinel. Its presence alone had changed history. No weapons had fired, no lives had been lost. And yet the war that had haunted these two civilizations for generations had paused, and the path toward peace had begun. The final agreements were being signed. Borders were carefully outlined, patrols for civilian protection agreed upon, and trade routes opened with shared responsibility. Every signature, every handshake, every bow carried the weight of centuries of distrust being set aside. Even the smallest gestures were monumental, proof that the delegates had chosen life over pride, cooperation over conquest. The Vortan general, once brimming with defiance, now lowered his claws and extended a hand to the Zerithian diplomat. "Perhaps strength is not only in combat," he said softly, voice tinged with humility. "Perhaps courage is choosing to protect life when it is easier to destroy." The Zerithian diplomat's blue eyes softened, and she returned the gesture. "And perhaps hope is stronger than anger. Perhaps it is time to build, not destroy." Elias felt the swell of pride in his chest. This was why humans had survived in a galaxy that constantly underestimated them. It was not their technology, not their numbers, but their unwavering courage, their ability to act for what was right, and their respect for life that made them formidable. And now that same courage had changed the course of history without firing a single shot. Mara Lynn, standing beside him, whispered, "Captain, They believe it. They truly believe it. And it's because of us, because of humans. Elias nodded quietly. We didn't do this for glory. We did it because it was necessary. Because life is worth protecting. Today, the galaxy remembers that. Below in the hall, the delegates began to speak not as enemies, but as partners. They discussed cultural exchanges, shared resources, and mutual aid for colonies at risk. The conversation was cautious, but filled with possibility. Even centuries of war could not erase the hope now planted in their hearts. The young Zerithian cadet spoke, her voice trembling but filled with sincerity. I have learned that courage is not only in the battlefield. It is in choosing understanding, in choosing life, in standing for what is right even when it is difficult. The Vortan soldier beside her nodded slowly. And I have learned that fear and hatred can blind even the strongest. But courage can open the eyes of generations. Elias allowed himself a rare smile. Humanity had reminded the galaxy that the greatest victories were not always won with weapons. Sometimes the mere presence of someone willing to act with courage and honor could rewrite history. As the agreements were finalized, Elias activated the comm to address the hall. This is your choice. We have only reminded you of what is possible. The galaxy belongs to those who protect life, not destroy it. Today you have taken the first step toward a better future. Guard it, nurture it, and remember that courage is stronger than hate. The delegates bowed slightly, a silent acknowledgement of the lesson humanity had brought. The Terran Warship gleaming in the sky above was a symbol of hope. And then, with engines humming softly, it slowly lifted from orbit, moving toward the stars. It did not look back, but its presence would linger in memory, in stories, and in the hearts of every being who had witnessed it. Captain Elias Carter watched until the ship vanished into the distance. This is only the beginning, he said softly. The galaxy will remember today. They will remember what humans can do, not to conquer, but to protect. And maybe, just maybe, they will choose courage over hatred, life over war, more often than they have before. Mara Lynn smiled beside him. We've given them hope, Captain, and hope is the strongest weapon of all. Elias nodded, feeling the weight of history settle gently on his shoulders. Humanity had not claimed victory with lasers or bombs. They had claimed it with heart, with moral strength, and with courage. The galaxy had learned a lesson it would not soon forget. The smallest presence with the right principles could change the fate of billions. As the stars stretched endlessly before them, Elias knew one truth: humanity had left a legacy, not of conquest, not of domination, but of courage, honor, and the unwavering choice to protect life. And the universe, for the first time in centuries, felt just a little safer because of it. The Terran Warship moved further into the cosmos, silent, powerful, and patient. And somewhere, deep in the hearts of those who had once been enemies, a quiet thought began to grow. Maybe life, guided by courage, was always worth fighting for.